Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the Peacock TV series Laid with cast members Stephanie Hsu and Zosia Mamet. And Stephanie, one of the first things that I wanted to ask you about was, you know, one of the great things about Ruby is that she does have this foundation of really wanting to believe that she can be at the center of a rom-com and that that type of romantic love exists and can come into her world. And I was interested in how you kind of used that want that she has so central as a character as a real foundation for building and developing her and finding her when you first got these scripts.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, nobody has asked that yet. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I really do love about Ruby, as flawed as she is that she just unabashedly loves love as much as she does, which I think so many of us do, but never have a space these days to be totally honest about. It's kind of cooler to think love is fine. um but I think that is such a, she really does want it that badly. And so every weekend, actually, the show sort of takes a lot of twists and turns and gets darker and also more serious in some episodes later on. But every weekend, I would watch a rom-com just because I was like, there's still something glittery and like sparkly that she is pining for. And if she loses that want, then the show's going to take a whole different direction. And even if Stephanie, might be like, Ruby, what you're looking for, I don't know if it exists. Ruby has to believe that it does. So, yeah, that was a really fun exercise of something to just kind of let be a guiding light for a character.
I love that. And for you, Zasha, in playing AJ, it's really interesting to kind of watch her energy and how she lights up with the idea of being able to figure out this whole case and, I'm going to be the person that cracks this and solves this. But the joy comes from the fact that she's not in the center of the storm. And I was curious if you kind of got the impression that she's kind of very comfortable being someone who doesn't need to be at the foreground of everything, but she does enjoy kind of being in that swirl of energy that comes, especially from being friends with someone like Ruby.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think she's like a very classic sidekick in that way. Like she kind of wants to be the person who is helping to make the machine run, but she doesn't necessarily want to be like the face of anything. I also think, she's someone who has maybe found in some sense of the way what Ruby is looking for in terms of like a committed relationship, but I think um she's not necessarily happy with where she is in her life. And so also a part of the pull for her, at least in the way that I reasoned it, was like part of why she's so down to just like jump wholeheartedly into figuring Ruby shit out is that it means she doesn't have to look at her own messy side of the street and like what she's dissatisfied with and where she is in life and maybe her part in it. She's like, oh, we're just going to focus on solving this mystery as opposed to me focusing on the fact that like I'm unhappy in my long-term relationship. And I think that I loved that was like, in my opinion, a very human, relatable coping mechanism.
I also feel like you've both done such an amazing job at really figuring out the tone of the writing and the tone of the performances in this show in a way that feels really aligned and connected. And it's not an easy task to be having a show where you have people dying in front of you, and that's something that's quite traumatic to these characters, and yet you still have to kind of find the comedic play of what that looks like. And I was really interested for both of you in how you set about approaching that.
I mean, I think so much of that, and we've talked about this a lot, was like what we were given on the page was already walking that line so beautifully. I think Nanachka and Sally and all of our amazing writers really figured out how to write the musicality of that comedy while having that grounded through line, just coloring everything. And we sometimes would like you change one word, even if it's something small like an and or a but. And it's not that they were precious about it, but you just sort of like when you're in the flow of things, maybe you move something around and we would call cut and be like, oh, that wasn't as good. Like actually exactly how they wrote it was the way that it needed to be. And I think starting from that place where it's already just on the page and the balance has been struck within the writing is a really helpful place to start from when you're trying to sort of like nail this slightly complicated tone.
Was that the
Totally.
same for you?
100%. Our writers are incredible. And just as Zasha said, I think it was the musicality of it all was so on the page that it became like such a easy way, easy, not difficult to do, but like an incredible foundation for us to jump inside of. That being said, then you see the deaths, like then you see it in person and you're like, who is the crazy person who came up with this idea? Who thought this was right?
Also in the writing, they both have these kind of really strong driving factors and elements from their childhood in terms of story points. And starting with you, Zasha, there's the fact that AJ met a rockette at a rockette show that was later murdered by a drug dealer when she was 7 years old. And so that has been the driving force of this obsession with true crime that she's had ever since. And I was interested in how when you have a detail like that in the script, which isn't just a pass away mention, but is actually really fundamental to who they are as a person, how that really helped you in figuring out who she was early on.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that like um I took that and like built it out in a big way, but again, I think echoing back to what we said before about the writers, it's like they did such an incredible job of creating these like seriously three-dimensional characters. I think, Stephanie has mentioned this a lot while we're doing press, that like I think a lot of these characters very easily could have become very tropey. And I think they all really bucked against that. And they wrote these very funny, but also very dynamic and flawed and human characters. And so for me, at least, more so than just like, absolutely, I think that that was like a hilarious joke and a very funny mention. But I think beyond that, yeah, I just felt so lucky, like falling into all of those amazing little pieces that they'd put together to like create the puzzles of all of the characters within the show. So, but that line is hilarious, and amazing, and I loved it. But I think there was like a lot more, is what I'm saying, that contributed to forming the entire vision of like what AJ was.
Yeah, no, you're right. And for you, Stephanie, in terms of her relationship with her dad and the fact that they've had a really distant relationship and she hasn't talked to him in several years because she felt abandoned after her mother passed away, I was interested in how that kind of shaped the way that you went into a lot of the relationship dynamics, because it feels like that's obviously a big reason that she's always struggled to get close to people, feeling let down by the most important person in her world.
Totally. That was actually a thing that Notch and Sally told me when they were pitching me the show. The one thing that they definitely knew. They were like, we know there's a sex timeline. And we know that at the spoiler, or we know that um that Ruby has a very complicated relationship with her father and was abandoned at a very early age. So that was kind of a really helpful just like key piece of information. And of course so much of her journey, I like to say Ruby, it's not a coming of age story, it's a coming to term story. And of course she hasn't dealt with all of her stuff, because we're all imperfect, and it's sometimes not fun to think about all the most painful aspects of your life. So I think that's part of what makes her really relatable, is that she doesn't have it all figured out, but of course the way she cannot find relationship and intimacy has so much to do with a very key component of her childhood that she did not get when she was younger. And I wanted to just quickly shout out to, like, I feel like the writers wrote these really incredible characters, and also the alchemy of this entire cast, just in terms of like the spirit of collaboration that was allowed and permitted for us to jump into these characters, is I think what makes, I would say that like none of our characters are tropes. Like they may fall under the umbrella of the best friend, or will they, won't they, and like the one that's hunky, the one that works at a Toyota dealership, and then Andre Highland. But but I feel like I really, when I think back about the process, I really feel like I got to watch each actor bring some of their mischief and magic into what they were given. And that I think is really special. And a testament to all the people who came to play as well.
I also think there's a huge amount in terms of the way that it represents female friendship and just that level of closeness. And, in particular, wanted to talk about when they argue and when they fall out because it's so personal and it's all of their history together. And, it's the thing that I used to love about you is now the thing that drives me crazy, which is so realistic. And I kind of love that it pays homage in the way that the breakup of a female friendship can be just as hurtful as a romantic relationship that's important falling apart. And so when you were filming those scenes together, how did you want to kind of set about capturing that side of it all?
We've talked about that a lot, and I think um I think female friendship is something specifically as you get older as a woman that's like so incredibly important, and something we were talking about earlier today is like, I think as we get older and we have these friendships that we've had for a really long time, sometimes you morph and change, or the other person does, or circumstances do. And so there are these like different pushes and pulls on relationships. Um, but I think as long as the love is there, that's the thing that matters most. And what we were talking about earlier is like, I think oftentimes, especially with like the advent of social media and how everything is so perfectly curated and presented, we sort of forget that like humans are imperfect and we make mistakes. And I think that was something I love so much about the storyline, all the storylines in general on our show. And, Steph talks about it a lot about Ruby's character, but I think within the relationships, it's not like mistakes were made and you can never come back from them. It's like mistakes were made, and now how do we learn and grow and repair and become better from it? And I think with friendships, oftentimes the breakups are even more brutal than with relationships because it's not a clear delineation of like someone cheated and now it's over. It's more so, more often than not, I think like a deep betrayal of trust. And I think sometimes, specifically with female friendships, you can be so much closer with those people than you ever would be with romantic partners. Like, I think we share more with our friends often than we do with our partners. And I don't know, I found filming those scenes like really rewarding and rich as an actor working across from this amazing human, but really heartbreaking because they are so, so sad. But I loved that within the writing, they allowed for it wasn't so black and white. They allowed for the gray area of like, okay, something really horrific happened here, but like, do these people love each other enough to try and move beyond it?
I
And for
think
you, Stephanie?
perfectly said. I mean, I think I remember doing some of those scenes that are a little bit more like the Ruby AJ breakup scenes and just feeling like, ah, man, this sucks. Like I think it was the like main fight scene after AJ finds out about Ruby's big boo boo. And I remember after filming that, Andre was with us and we would go back into the tent and we were like, I don't feel good.
Like, we don't like this.
We don't like this. We don't like to fight because you're, rooting for these characters so much. But of course, like as an actor, when you're inside of something, the sort of membranes of feeling become very one and the same. But I think, and just in like a larger conversation around love too, like it is true that like love is love, and friendships are like chosen family just as like partners are like chosen family. And it's just so thick. I can't imagine. I mean, I've had like maybe fights with a friend of like a close beloved, but I haven't had like a deep breakup before, and that would just, I think I would be unwell for life.
I mean, within that as well, with the reconciliation, Sasha, one of the things that I like with AJ is the fact that she is a forgiving person, but she also sets boundaries. And,
Mm.
kind of what it takes for her to forgive is I needed to see that you were listening to me, and I needed to see you do something completely selfless that you didn't even know that I would ever find out that you did. And I was curious if there was kind of like a consciousness on your end of what needed to happen story-wise and kind of within this relationship for it to be a genuine forgiveness and not just a, I think we'll be okay for a bit, because it does really feel like a genuine coming back together with them.
I mean, not to sound repetitive, but I I normally like to leave the writing up to the writers, and I think because from the pilot, I was like, oh my goodness, these people are going to write this better than I ever could have imagined. So I kind of just really allowed myself to go along for that ride. But that's such a great point, um, that no one has pointed out yet, that I think is really important and really poignant, is like, um, and again, it's just speaking to like how incredible they all are in terms of writing that, all of the storylines throughout the show. But yeah, I think it did feel really genuine to me. I was like, oh yes, if this happened to me, I think I would be able to forgive this, because like this was such a deep act of selflessness, and it really does show that she heard me, and like that Ruby heard AJ, and that she really did take it to heart, and she like thought outside of the box of her selfishness, which I think is AJ's biggest qualm with her, is like, I feel like you can't see beyond yourself to how your actions affect other people. And yeah, it really spoke to me too, of like the love that they have for each other is big enough to win out over this very large bump in the road that they pass through. But yeah, I thought the writers did such an incredible job of just like writing something that was really true and genuine and believable, at least to me.
Yeah, no, the details in the writing are so great, and also for you, Stephanie, in terms of Ruby's journey, it is this journey of her kind of realizing that she needs to be a little bit more self-reflective, and she needs to be a little bit more selfless towards the people that are important to her, and that's ultimately going to be the thing that will bring her more intimacy. And so how did you really use the scripts and the writing as a guiding force of finding that gradual journey towards where you wanted to leave her at the end of these episodes?
I mean, that is something that I think that, again, so after every draft, I would get together with Notch and Sally and our producer Jen to just talk about Ruby's arc and also just notes on the script. And the thing that felt really important to us is that, Ruby, it's like she we do believe she's doing her best, and like what she's asking and trying to figure out is something that I think one of Notch and Sally's favorite things that happened after a note session once is we were like talking about love and intimacy and like the arc of the season, and Notch was like, well, yeah, I mean, I think that if Ruby was able to just be able to show her vulnerability, then maybe she would understand like how to be in relationship. And we were sitting there and I was like, okay, but actually, just for the sake of argument, what is vulnerability? Like, yes, everyone talks about being vulnerable, but what is that? And I do feel like these questions were, I mean, obviously, well, anyway, we have ideas about how to unpack that in like a Latin root form, if we had another season, but just these terms that people kind of throw around as if you're supposed to have love figured out, and just to give her a little bit of space to really ask like, what do you mean when you say that? What do people mean? Because I watched When Harry Met Sally like 10,000 times, and actually I still haven't had it figured out, so that's sort of a loop-de-doop question. But basically, I think for us, in terms of just building the arc, was being able to return to these questions and trying to understand the fundamentals of love, like as best as a flawed female character can. Yeah.
And Sasha, you were also talking a little bit earlier about the romantic relationship that AJ's in with Zach, and just, not necessarily being in a place where she's completely happy, even though it's someone that she is deeply in love with. And, it kind of feels like that relationship from the outside that you look at, and one person has kind of grown and matured, and the other person has stagnated and stayed exactly where they were at the beginning. And I was just interested in kind of like what you found within that dynamic and that relationship with that sort of different, the two of them being on different paths kind of at play.
Well, first of all, working with Andre is amazing and like one of the most fun things in the world, because he is probably one of the best improvers I've ever worked with in my life.
The two of them together are machines. They're improvising machines.
Thank you. It's so much fun. And he is incredible. And like, to Stephanie's point about everyone who just, the alchemy of this show, I mean, it would not be what it is without every single individual person bringing what they brought to it. But something that I really loved about that dynamic is I love all of what Steph was saying, like all of the questions that I feel like this show sort of makes you ask, and it pushes a little bit further to that point of like, well, what does it actually mean to be vulnerable with somebody? It's like, it's always pushing slightly beyond what we've all just sort of bought into in terms of like what love is, what romance is, what a happy ending is. And something I really liked about the storyline and the arc that they wrote for AJ and Zach is like, AJ's sort of sitting here saying, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this. She's not really looking at her own side of the street in terms of how not only she's maybe contributing to the dysfunction in the relationship, but also her passivity in it. The fact that like she's never really asked him to change or be better or different. Like she's kind of just gone along for the ride and then been like, well, I'm not happy. And so I really enjoyed playing with that dynamic. And I think she has grown in ways that he hasn't. But relationships take tending and care, and they're complicated. And I think the idea of long-term relationship is like kind of crazy. I mean, I'm in one and I think it's wonderful and amazing, but the fact that you would expect two people to forever be in the same place over their lifetime is like, it's kind of an impossible ask. And so I think more so it's about like, how do you shift and move with the person that you're in partnership with throughout this lifespan? And like maybe sometimes they're further ahead and maybe sometimes you are. And it's just about finding the person that like you're okay to shift and morph with, as opposed to always being on the exact same plane. And I think that that's what she sort of comes to terms with at the end, is like, is my love for this person, the same thing with Ruby, is that the thing that's going to outweigh the ways in which I maybe feel like we aren't perfectly aligned at the moment? And do I trust the fact that we will get to a place again where like we are in harmony with one another?
I will say that like that, Notch and Sally like to say that, this is the twisted rom-com for our times. And whether that can sound like a sound bite for press, but I do believe that actually, what Z is even talking about with AJ and Zach, and what you see with Richie and what you see with Isaac, and how everyone is kind of moving through their relationships or non-relationships, it does feel like this generation, which I would say like the millennial umbrella, is very much like asking a lot of these questions. The models of love that we grew up with, whether it was in our homes or in movies, it's not like that. Like our parents didn't have apps, you know what I mean? Modern dating is a whole different ball game, and that's really exciting. I think like nothing has really quite been able to speak to the chaotic mess that it is. Which my favorite thing is when people are interviewing us us getting to be like, well, what's going on in your life? Because it feels like.
It made some people very uncomfortable, and it's really
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
You've just been psychoanalyzing everyone in the junkets.
Yeah, exactly. Well, who's watching who, am I right?
Yeah.
On a slightly different note of the show, Stephanie, I wanted to ask about performing the Greatest Showman sequences that Ruby steps into with Isaac, because I think it's such a great space of just, shedding everything in the moment and just stepping into the comedy. But it's also part of what builds their connection with each other. And I was just very curious about how those scenes came about and the way that they ultimately ended up.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, Tommy and I did rehearse. We had a choreographer and we had some dance rehearsals, and it was funny because, specifically with the writers, we've been saying that like everyone gets one, right? Where like Sally Bradford McKenna was like, I don't know why, but I just want Ruby to sing Graceland for far too long. And then Notch like was really attached to this JetBlue joke. I don't actually know whose idea it was to do The Greatest Showman, but someone was really pushing for that. And I have to say, like, when, we first got to rehearsal, Tommy, who plays Isaac, had already been rehearsing the dance. And there was something so magical and twinkly about stepping into a rehearsal room, seeing how hard he'd been working for all this time, watching him do the whole dance for me. I was like, okay, well, I don't even need to act on this day because this is so charming. But it's really silly, but it's like there's something about it that is so vulnerable and so open-hearted that is very courageous in a way, and yeah, I mean, it was very, very fun. It's an honor to play the bearded lady. Those are just moments where, like, yeah, again, we've been saying this a bunch today, but you see something on the page and you're like, haha, yes, bearded lady. Then you like show up on set and you're tying a ponytail around your chin. And you're like, oh yeah, this is what this show is.
I love it. Was the idea for you to have your hair kind of tied around your chin? Was that something in the script or was that something that came up on set?
That was in the script. Yeah.
Love it. It's such a great detail. And
one thing I really
yeah.
wanted to pull off that we weren't able to pull off was there's a phone call scene after The Greatest Showman, and we really wanted to make it like I had a elastic imprint, like when you're dehydrated and you have a rubber band on your wrist and there's an indent. We really wanted to get that on my chin for the phone call. But it didn't work.
That's a great dream, though. I wish that dream had been realized.
Season 2.
Season 2.
Zosia, in terms of talking about one of the spoilers towards the end of the last episode, I did want to ask about filming that scene with Amanda Knox when, that's the surprise that she's been gifted by her best friend, because I think it's such a great moment. There's kind of the rom-com vibe to it, the comedy. Amanda's so great in that scene and kind of like very self-referential in terms of the comedy that she brings. And so I was just interested in, your experience in coming into that and finding those different tones in that moment.
It was a crazy night. Sally Bradford McKenna was, I haven't known her long, but I had never seen her that nervous. She was, I think that was probably like that was like her pipe dream. That was her biggest to like, and we were all so excited. I think we all felt so honored that she was coming to do this, and to your point, like so self-referential, so just like down to be in on the joke. And she was so good. It was a very small set that night. We tried to keep it really private. We wanted to like respect her privacy and also keep the secret on lock. And yeah, basically what you saw was sort of our night. It was like us sitting across from the table from each other, holding hands sometimes not. And basically Nanachka was just like, okay, Amanda, like, tell us stories. Zosia, ask questions. And that's pretty much what we did. And I was like, okay, I have so many questions. And she was so funny and so grounded and sincere, and it honestly wasn't, I really just kind of gave over to the moment of it and let her steer the ship, and it was pretty magical. It was pretty amazing. I would definitely say it was like, I didn't know that it was a pipe dream as an actor, but when I read it in the script, I was like, oh my God, this is a bucket list moment. Incredible. And she's so funny. She's so brilliant. She's so smart. Oh my goodness gracious. Yeah, it was a special night for sure.
It's so great. Well, I love everything that you've both brought in your performances in this show. It was such a great series. So congratulations and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You.